Improving pharmaceutical product value, rethinking payer interactions, payers' thoughts on more meaningful dialogue with pharma. What best practices can pharmaceutical manufacturers follow to communicate the full value of their products more effectively to payers? And what internal changes and training might be required to maximize pharma's investment in payer account management? Join us to find out. In the Know starts now. Hello and welcome to In the Know, your source for insight and analysis on the issues that matter to our dynamic healthcare market. I'm your host, Gina Clark. Today we turn our focus to how some pharmaceutical companies are opting to change their approach to payer relations and what results they are seeing from it. We will discuss market research that details what payers think of their interactions with pharma, what lessons can be derived from that data, and how pharmaceutical companies can gain a realistic assessment of their current payer account management performance. Joining us today is Tom Mullin, Vice President of Customer Relations with Xcenda. Thanks for joining us today, Tom.
Thank you, Gina. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So, Tom, before we examine the direction and trends around how manufacturers are working with payers, can you give us some perspective on what manufacturers have previously done to communicate their products' value to payers? And how did this process work as recently as a few years ago?
Well, Gina, as you know, I was a regional account manager for a top 5 pharmaceutical company about 5 years ago. And at that time, we really spent a lot of our efforts negotiating contracts and trying to build a relationship with the payer. We said that we really wanted to be in a partnership with the payer as a manufacturer, but we really weren't doing anything to prove the value of our products in the terms that payers care most about. And that's really what the impact's going to be on their business and how those products are going to benefit their membership. Nowadays, we see that changing. Payers are asking specifically for health outcomes and economic information to prove the value of a manufacturer product, and they've come to expect it. I think a sound value proposition has moved from being a nice to have to really a need to have in the payer sales process.
What is driving the need for this changing approach, and how quickly have most manufacturers reacted?
Well, I think there's a few factors driving this change that we're seeing as it relates to training needs for manufacturers. The first is that the market is changing right in front of us. What used to be a priority market for small molecule products, pharmacy benefit products, just 6 or 8 years ago is quickly evolving to a much more specialty market. That brings a lot of changes as it relates to drug distribution, policy covering those drugs, and frankly cost. Most of the new specialty products coming to market are a lot more expensive, and therefore the onus is much more on the manufacturer to prove the value of those products in a context that the payers care about.
So that takes us to the present. In this age of increased scrutiny around cost versus value, what are payers looking for from manufacturers?
Well, it's interesting. We've done some primary research with payers over the last couple of years and essentially asking them what do they want to see from manufacturers that come in to call on them and talk about their products. As you would expect, they are looking for a strong clinical knowledge to understand what the clinical benefit of these products are and how they'll benefit members you know, from the standpoint of the quality of care that the health plan can deliver. But the other two areas were maybe a little bit of a surprise. The first is what I mentioned a moment ago, that a value proposition based on health economic information has become sort of a standard. But the other piece that we're hearing from payers is that so many manufacturer representatives that call on them really don't understand the ins and outs of the payer's business. And if you think about the training programs that we had in place at manufacturers for several years, even the last couple of decades, they do tend to focus more on clinical benefits, differentiators, features and benefits of the brands. But that's not the way that payers make decisions. They're trying to manage a population, deliver high quality care, and do it as economically as possible. So that's the context in which they would like to see the value of a product from a manufacturer.
If you're a manufacturer, then what might your ideal approach to payer account management look like today?
Well, I think it starts with that strong fundamental understanding of how a payer conducts business, how they make decisions, how they're organized. but it needs to go much deeper than I think we've focused on from a training perspective within manufacturers historically. I think that we need to go into the areas of actuarial analysis, how quality is assessed, how risk financial risk is taken on by payers and managed. And once the manufacturer's sales personnel have an understanding of that full construct and decision-making framework of payers, then they have the right lens through which to view their own product's value proposition and then differentiate from their competitors in the marketplace as well.
How do manufacturers get there from where they are now?
Well, we have a pretty well-defined gap analysis process that we follow, but my hunch is that it's probably not very unlike a lot of the process improvement systems that exist within manufacturers today. It typically involves stakeholder interviews, both internal and external, to really gauge where the unmet need is from a training perspective, and then try to fill those gaps. So I would recommend that anyone who's wondering if their training program is or isn't getting it done, so to speak, that they conduct an internal gap analysis and maybe even go as far as talking to some of their payer customers to see how they rank versus other manufacturers. There's some useful third-party data that publishes which companies are well-liked and respected by payers, but it's not until you ask a payer specifically how your company is doing, how your people are doing, that you can get a true appreciation for really where you are on the map.
So Tom, what role does appropriate and effective account management training play into all of this? Among manufacturers who are doing this correctly, can you talk through some of the best practices of how their payer account management training works?
Sure. Well, one thing we see is a couple of our clients that are large pharma or biotech companies that have made the investment in training are seeing the results. They are seeing the fruits of their labor. And what I mean is that some of the companies that have adopted a value-based selling platform several years ago and have had that in place for a few years, that have been training their payer-facing account managers on not just value proposition delivery, but the business of the payer. They are the very same companies that are ranking very high in these results, in these third-party surveys, and even in the research that we've conducted on a proprietary basis. So where we've seen training investment, we've seen results in ability to influence payers' perception of those companies and their ultimate take on how effective those folks are doing their job.